Heretic, one of the latest horror movies by A24 that was actually made by them and not just picked up by them. It was one of my favorites out of the Toronto International Film Festival, and I am so happy that it is finally here for home viewing. And as the weather outside is getting colder and grosser, this movie does just feel like it fits in perfectly with this time of year. Heretic, your non-conventional Christmas movie? Maybe. So no spoiler premise, two young missionaries find themselves trapped in a sick game of choice and control when they knock on the door of Mr. Reed, brought to life fantastically by Hugh Grant, who's just having a blast being this quirky little creepo. You'll come to find that he is in fact a creep.
I'm a weirdo.
Freed from his rom-com typecast. But other than him, we have Sophie Thatcher, who I've been a huge fan of since seeing her on Yellow Jackets, and she was as amazing as expected. But Chloe E has really popped in as the surprise of this movie, which I will get more into. It's very interesting how their outward personalities and how they initially come across in the movie play into the conclusion of the movie. I think it's very interesting. But I gotta say, it's a very strong season for religious-infused movies, though, between this and Conclave. They were two of my favorites out of TIFF and the fall festival circuit in general, so not a lot of overlap between those two movies, but they're good. They're just good. But I also need to clarify that I think this movie has less to do with the very specific doctrines and ideologies and more just about choices in general. How institutions indoctrinate and control those choices in ways you can't even anticipate. I think even the title has origin in a Greek word that means able to choose, even though it obviously fits the definition of a religious heretic. So some no spoiler thoughts on it. Again, I think this was a really good movie. It might be a little bit wordy for some people because so much of this movie is just this kind of back and forth, which I personally really enjoyed, but I get that that's not for everyone. I think it would have been cool to see a few more layers and dimensions to the house, especially when you see this image of Dante's Inferno on his wall. And that's just kind of a little nitpick I had after seeing the trailer, because I hadn't seen that until after I'd already seen the movie, and they make such a good focus on this little model display of the house he has. So I think some people might have been expecting more there. Now, I know a lot of people come here because they don't think they can handle watching scary movies by themselves and need to know kind of a general idea of what to expect before getting into it. But I will say that this has a creepy, tense vibe, but it does kind of infuse more of that comedy in there, just that quirky, unsettled humor.
Avatars, everyone has their favorite. I shall not tell you mine.
Yeah. There are a couple scenes that get a little bloody, but it's not over the top jump scare. It's not super intense. I would say that this is a pretty a decent jumping in point for most people and horror. And again, I just want to be very clear, we are going to be going full spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, I know it's still playing in a bunch of theaters right now. And if it's out of theaters where you are, it hit VOD already. So there are lots of different ways to catch this movie before you watch this video if you want to see it first. So right from the beginning, this movie is priming us on the idea of choice, and more specifically, the way we're influenced into making certain choices without even realizing we didn't have full control of the wheel. Starting with a conversation about whether or not Magnum condoms are actually larger than average, or if it's just marketing to make guys buy them more, as it pans back to reveal this hilarious Jaws-inspired condom ad, which leads one of the girls to start talking about how she saw a spicy intercourse video. She's not sure where, but it was that moment that she truly felt she was being shown God when she saw the shame enter the woman on screen's eyes. That in that moment, that woman knew she was doing wrong as her soul left her body and she could feel God's judgment.
God's real. We have souls. It's divine confirmation.
Not the most traditional way to get there, and I definitely wouldn't tell the elders for multiple reasons, but hey, good job.
Do you watch a lot of...
No, I'm not a pornographer.
So this is our first little indication that Sister Paxton here may not be as naive or devoted fully to the church as she'll come to seem, but the two have very different dynamics, which I find interesting. Sophie Thatcher is Sister Barnes, and her family converted to Mormonism after the death of her father, and they landed here after kind of looking for the right denominational fit. And maybe because it was this more active choice that she was kind of consciously aware for, she seems way more committed to her beliefs. She reads more scripture. She's had 9 church conversions on these missionary trips.
8 or 9? Balls.
Well, Chloe East's Sister Paxton hasn't made any conversions, even though she grew up in Utah in the church as a Mormon her whole life with 8 sisters fully entrenched from birth. But it's almost like having it be this thing that was always there for her means that she doesn't have the same foundation to convince other people of that gospel because she's never had to question it within herself. But on the same note of this divine revelation, Sister Barnes doesn't feel like she's been shown anything to confirm this belief or knowledge that this is specifically the truth. She just believes. And honestly, so much of this movie and where it goes can come come right back to this simple conversation about porn, condoms, and the South Park musical.
I listened to some of the songs and they're actually pretty funny.
I feel like you can really see these differences between them even in how they choose to spread the good word. Barnes is much more chill, feels more mature, more street smart, actually seems to study and contemplate the scripture, while Sister Paxton kind of comes across like an excited golden retriever.
And preach the gospel to the world. And because of apostasy,
Would you like to
people
come
lose
inside?
knowledge of
So they get to Mr. Reed's house here because he specifically requested more information about the church, which honestly seems like a surefire way to get caught very quickly if you do something weird, but that's fine.
You mentioned you might be interested in learning more about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Yeah.
But here is where they're presented with their first choice. They're not allowed to be alone with men, but without ever seeing his wife, they just decide to trust him and go inside, where he immediately drops this little tidbit.
Oh, one thing, the walls and ceilings have metal in them. I hope that's okay.
Now, even if you didn't realize that that means that your cell phones wouldn't work, you should kind of be taken aback by such a weird statement and maybe ask about it, but they're youngins. We'll let this one slide. Then when he goes to get some drinks and check on the snacks, the pie his wife allegedly has in the oven, he just completely takes their coats with him. But they're feeling pretty good. It's a quaint little house. There's a bless this mess crochet. It's all coming together. Make note of this butterfly. Then there's another seemingly basic choice. Mormons typically don't drink caffeine. I think it varies amongst like who believes what and whether or not they follow it super hard, but he brought them soda, which they then don't drink. This will just seem like a little oversight on his part, but as the movie progresses, you'll know that this was definitely a specific choice on his part. He wants to see what they'll do. So he's specifically very interested in Barnes because he likes the fact that her family shopped around for what felt right to them, because that's the personal struggle that he seems to be facing, which is why he's already incredibly well read in the Book of Mormon and every other scripture. He just wants that one true answer and is therefore super interested in how other people have come across what their one true answer is. Like they walk in there and dude already had an annotated Book of Mormon. They thought they hit the jackpot.
No, you read more than we do, Mr. Reed.
Also thought it was funny that you can see that Sister Barnes rolled her eyes there because you can see in her copy, it is very well annotated. She does her readings. So he wants to know if Barnes ever been shown anything to give her that conviction. Like, did her father send any messages from the afterlife to her? This is also where they make sure to let us know that he notices that she has a scar on her arm which looks like a birth control implant. Something that at face value the church would definitely look down on. So this whole conversation is basically him just kind of like pushing boundaries, making things a little awkward, but then pulling back to the point that they don't feel so uncomfortable that they immediately want to leave. But then he asks about polygamy. Absolutely not what you want to hear when you're stuck in some guy's house, but he's not curious for him. He's curious about how the church utilized it. How it seemingly came out of nowhere and seemed more like Joseph Smith needing to cover up cheating on his wife, and then was modern revelationed away in the 1890s when it was causing controversy for the church, even though the practice absolutely continued on following the excommunications of 1904. My mom watches Sister Wives, and again, this is where we see the different dynamic between Barnes and Paxton. Paxton seemingly just taking those changes in the church without much consideration.
Yeah, it's sketch for sure.
And Barnes having the more considered and reasoned response of how it came to be to increase birth rates in the church following war, and then was ended when it was no longer needed. Obviously, depending on where you fall on the belief scale, either one of these interpretations is viable.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Spider-Man.
Voltaire.
The key thing he wants to express here is that while he went through every religion, it ultimately just made him feel further away from the truth. He now feels like he's gotten down to it.
The last thing I wanted to do was find the one true religion, but unfortunately I did.
Which is when they start getting a little bit more unsettled. He goes to get his wife, which is when Barnes realizes that there's no pie, probably no wife. It was a damn candle the entire time. So at this point, they can't escape. The entire house is on these weird timers, including deadbolts, meaning the front door won't open. They realize the bike key was moved from Barnes' coats to Paxton's, and the only way out of the house, according to him, is through one of these two doors that both seem to lead to a creepy dungeon basement. So the sham is up. He calls them out for lying about getting phone calls because they physically can't, and whether or not they really think his wife is in the next room.
Or have you been politely indulging a lie?
Suggesting that, like their religion, they believed in the wife because they were told to. And while I get the point he's making, a lot of what's happened up to this point has more to do with social conventions and not wanting to upset people than blind belief. Especially when you're a younger girl like this, you were just trying so hard not to be awkward and just get a situation to end, but if someone doesn't care about those boundaries or notice them, it's not gonna work. You can literally see it in how Paxton keeps trying to engage with him on a personal level once she realizes running isn't an option. Like, the Cokes work as a test of faith, but also makes sense that two young girls wouldn't drink something they didn't see prepared when alone with a stranger, even though it is the church telling these young women to go around from house to house, which is absurd. But for Mr. Reed, just like their earlier condom talk,
I've wanted you to think about the things that you believe just because somebody asked you to believe.
Which brings him to his big presentation about iterations. Like Monopoly is an iteration of the landlord game, but became the only relevant one of the two. Like Radiohead sued Lana Del Rey for her song Get Free ripping off Creep, but they had already been sued by the Hollies for Creep ripping off The Air That I Breathe. With the ultimate point being that religions work in similar ways. Every iteration diluting some original source, that Jesus is basically an amalgamation of centuries-old stories that would then go on to create new iterations, like Star Wars Episode 1.
Can you imagine thousands of years from now people accepting Jar Jar as a significant religious figure?
So in this grand board game analogy, Mormonism is basically the Bob Rossopoly.
The zany regional spin-off edition.
And the reason why, like Monopoly, certain religions have dominated over the original all comes back to marketing. And that they are essentially the salesmen for the zany regional edition of Christianity, but it's just as hollow and fake as the rest of religion. Now, right here is where I want to address some of the critiques I've seen from church members, and I guess some religious people in general, that if this was about any other religion, it wouldn't be allowed to exist. And I just don't think that's true. Like, this movie literally says that all religions are just riffing off the same ancient fictions, but that they all present themselves as the truth, but it's not going particularly hard on it. Both Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East grew up in the LDS church, with Chloe specifically seeming a lot more presently connected. She openly said she wouldn't have done this movie if she had felt it was more a one-sided attack. One of the directors is married to a Mormon. The movie really does not go that hard on their religion, and more just what brought them to those beliefs. And let's be completely honest, there are a lot of very valid reasons to criticize aspects of all of those churches, so it just happens to be the Mormons are getting some heat now, and I actually don't think it went that hard on some of the stuff Mormons have been called out for in the last handful of years. Like the weird chastity interviews that often went entirely too far with underage members, and the glaring issues of the treatment of black people within the church. They literally did a screening of this movie with two people from the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, one who is an ex-Mormon, one who is still devout, so it really can't be that harsh. But even if nothing this man said was based in reality, and even though it all stays pretty shallow, his purpose here is to be that critic, to be the hater. He's the asshole with a god complex, and he's the antagonist of this story. That's the point of his character, so obviously the things he says are going to be hostile, and he will get called out for a lot of those points as this movie happens.
You asked why Judaism only makes up 0.2% of the world's population, but didn't even pause for the Holocaust.
For him, though, it really is all about their beliefs and relationships with God. Whether Barnes continues to believe despite being shown more evidence to the contrary, like suffering through the loss of her father to a horrible disease. Did she choose to continue believing because it brought her comfort? Obviously, there are some flaws in this logic, and Sister Barnes points out some of them. I don't think all of her points are great, but that is his foundation. So now he needs them to choose between belief and disbelief. Both doors seemingly lead to the same place, but the choice clearly matters to him. And there can't be an in-between. You either believe, which includes a world where God punishes people and makes your father wither away from disease, or you believe in a world with no grander purpose or eternal afterlife. Both seem equally as terrifying to Mr. Reed. And while Paxton wants to go through the door she thinks he wants them to, Barnes doesn't think he ever planned to let them go, and that this is all an experiment, so they might as well answer honestly. Bringing us right back to choices and influence. It's really all just a matter of how many layers of influence he planned for. But she's going to maintain that there's an entire layer he's not accounting for, that outside any of the issues with the scripture or the different denominations, that they believe in God. But you cannot have paid me enough money to go down there. There are two of you. Pitch a fit, attack brutally. As of right now, he doesn't seem interested in actually physically making you do anything. You just never go down the stairs.
Okay, we're leaving now. Thank you for all your mentorship, and thank you for letting us leave.
Oh, you poor sweet summer child. Because of course he locks them down there with no clear way out. Honestly, when she knocked this thing out of the ceiling, I don't know why they weren't just prepping to come out swinging the second he got down there. None of this dilly-dally waiting shit, just take care of it. Look, I'm not saying I'd survive an abduction, but if I die, it's because I tried to murder them first. But it's not him that comes down after them first, it's a woman with a damn pie. Wow, look, I guess he wasn't lying about that after all. She is a wreck though. We got like crackling bones, wheezing breath, near rotting flesh. And before they can even recover from whatever this is, he is just pumping creep down a pipe to them. And he's just up there meticulously tracking the events of the day as they meet every planned moment, while telling them that this is not Mrs. Reed, necessarily, depending on how you end up interpreting some of this. This is his prophet, who he will claim will come back to life after she's eaten the poison pie. Now, after he makes them witness someone drop dead, and they confirm that she is in fact quite dead, the doorbell rings. So they immediately try to rush up the stairs to scream for help. Because finally, their elder, Topher Grace, who, did you know that Topher's short for Christopher? I remember when I found that out. It was so weird. Anyways, played by Topher Grace has finally realized that they're missing. Looks like they were the only ones cleaning the bathrooms, and suddenly they're not. Now I know that some people felt like the scenes that were like cutting back to him realizing that they're missing actually removes tension from them being trapped with Mr. Reed, but I actually felt like it added to it. Like you get this full confirmation that someone's actually realized that they haven't come back. And if you're wondering why it took so late in the day, that's because these Mormon missions can go until literally 9 o'clock at night, so it would take a while for someone to realize something was wrong. But you're wondering if he is actually going to be able to find them or get to them in time, because they do actually have the list of all the people they were supposed to be visiting that day, and here he finally is, but he can't hear their screams. Because obviously Mr. Reed accounted for this. He had specifically requested information from the church. He knew his information would be on file. So you think he's got it all planned, but then the elder even comes back, which I don't think he was fully accounting for. And you're just so desperately hoping that he noticed something, like maybe their bikes chained up, but no, it was just to make sure he gave Mr. Reed a pamphlet about the church.
Have you received this booklet?
Even with 2 young girls missing, the mission is top priority. Now, the thing that really sucked about this the most to me is that if they just stayed upstairs for like a couple extra minutes, they'd probably be saved, like possibly. I'm sure he would have pivoted his plan if the doorbell rang, but still. Either way, they head back down to the basement to try to cause a distraction when Paxton realizes that the prophet's head is now facing the opposite direction. So she may be a little bit more perceptive than she initially let on. The movie has primed us to see Barnes as the more dominant force, the more experienced, the more capable counter to Mr. Reed. They both clocked that letter opener, but Barnes was the one to actually grab it, but then still ended up giving it to Paxton, because even she knows that Mr. Reed sees her as the one that needs to be focused on. She came up with a code word so Paxton would know when to make that attack.
If I say magic underwear, that means stab.
But in this moment, she's missing a key change and being very dismissive about it. Because if the body moved, it was either never actually dead or it's a different person. Because suddenly she pops up from the dead to spew, literally and figuratively, a prophecy about her resurrection and time on the other side. Ending with the words, "It is not real." So whether she's saying that heaven isn't real, that God is not real, that everything this guy is doing is not real, or this is just some cryptic message that's all a part of his larger game, it's pretty unsettling.
It's not real.
Which is when he rushes into the basement, seemingly a little bit behind schedule because he had to deal with the elder a second time, to ask them about her message from the other side as he whisks her away. Guess they don't revere the prophets in his religion, but after Paxton shares what he said, a feeling of dissociation, a train in the clouds with conductors, he says that they can be prophets too, that they can have all the answers to the questions and their fears that religion promises.
I can show you God.
Yeah, you know what? Confirmation of a deity would not be worth whatever the hell seems to be happening to these prophets. Not that they're immediately interested, and Barnes pretty quickly clocks what he might be trying to do.
I've been asking myself all night, how is he gonna make killing us our idea?
So Barnes is just going on about how this isn't a miracle, it's a magic trick.
Magic trick, huh?
Illusion, Michael.
That the prophet was never dead, and all the things she was describing about the afterlife perfectly match up with near-death experiences. Because she's had one of those. She got E. coli from Taco Bell and was dead for a bit while they operated.
What about Taco Bell?
We don't talk about Taco Bell. The kids at school called me Taco Hell.
Which is making great setup for that code word, which again is magic underpants. But before Barnes can get the word out, he slashes her jugular with a box cutter. And this was a moment. After the press greeting for this and the gasps I heard were just like palpable in the room, Sophie Thatcher has been the dominant force between these two girls the entire movie. If you thought one of them wasn't gonna make it out, it wasn't her. Especially when she's the one that a lot of viewers seem to have the most familiarity with. And she's gone like he's promising that she's gonna come back to life, but yeah, no, definitely not. And I just really appreciate that the movie went there so abruptly. Like up until this point, he hasn't done anything like overtly threatening towards them. He's just been letting them think that everything they're doing has been their own choice, that he's not forcing them into anything, that he's just giving them room to make decisions, and then this just pops out. So when Barnes obviously doesn't come back, he switches tactics and cuts the implant out of her arm and tries to tell Paxton that Barnes was a program the entire time. She wasn't a real person. Bold strategy here, Mr. Reed. Let's see how it plays out. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit disappointed when this happened, because I'm a big fan of Sophie Thatcher because of Yellow Jackets, but Chloe East is really gonna step up and shine here. They knew exactly what they were doing with these two characters, and she starts asking Mr. Reed to explain things so that she can also start to challenge them. So he pops out this butterfly concept of a philosopher wondering if he was a butterfly dreaming of being a man or a man dreaming of being a butterfly, which will be relevant later. Always remember the butterflies. Then he starts talking about simulation and passing over to the other side, and that if you're not a simulation, you can pass right back. But Paxton doesn't buy any of this and says that this isn't a chip. She's pretty sure it's a contraceptive. And then all this just feels like he's pivoting because something went out of his control.
Well, yeah, you're very welcome to challenge my premise. I love that.
And while I don't necessarily know if anything specifically went out of his control, I don't think he was accounting for the second doorbell ring. But Paxton feels pretty confident that the prophet wasn't supposed to say the part about something not being real.
Maybe she was trying to tell us
that the miracle wasn't real.
So her theory is that he swapped the bodies. That while they were distracted by the door, someone came in and took the dead prophet's place and rested her head the wrong way. Which all seems to be confirmed when she finds a hidden latch that leads one step deeper in the house.
The only way out is through
Robert Frost?
Swamp Thing.
I absolutely love that the iteration aspect goes right down to like comic book references with like classic philosophers. There's also an entire conversation about fast food, and then like she'd say one place and then Sophie would be like, I don't know what that is, and then she would just be like, oh, it's Hardee's on the East Coast.
Burger King is better than Hardee's, which is better than Rally's, which is Checkers.
Really is just iteration all the way down. But again, you could not have paid me enough to go down that hole, but I'm sure glad she did so I can see what's down there. At this point, she is shell-shocked, she is exhausted, and she just needs to know the truth and immediately feels vindicated when she sees the body before he closes the latch. Because no shit, Sister Paxton. But even though it really might have seemed like he was improvising, that prophet was not supposed to say the final line of her speech, he absolutely wanted Paxton to be in this place. Because as she starts to wander deeper and deeper past the sigils and religious items, she eventually comes across a door with their bike lock on it. So now the key being switched from Barnes's pocket to hers doesn't seem like a mistake. It's because he knew he was going to be taking care of Barnes before she had a chance to get down there, probably because Paxton seemed more outwardly malleable. He wanted her there, and she knows that. He was interested in seeing how far he could push people in their beliefs through control, how he could use it to make them act against their own self-interest, and he's been doing it for years now because inside this room is a bunch of women hunched in small cages being spritzed like their produce, making them all look so similarly unwell that it would be easy to swap bodies for your miracle facade. So at this point, he slips in the room and asks her what she thinks the one true religion is.
The one true religion is control.
And the control is what so many of these different institutions use to maintain their ranks and keep them in situations that are quite unhealthy. You know, not all to this extreme, but a lot of it's pretty messed up. These women are all here because of the choices they made, or at least the choices they think they made. They've drunk the Kool-Aid, which Mr. Reed, of course, references. One even lets him cut off her finger.
Why do you do this?
Why do you all let me?
Essentially making himself the god of this religion of control. Really trying to just drive home the idea that every choice she's ever made in life and faith is based on the ideas and influence of others. Right down to her magic underpants. Which is when she stabs him.
Your magic underwear.
She didn't get there last time, but she's pulling through now. She does immediately run away though when she should have yanked that thing out and kept going. Like, you gotta neutralize that threat, especially when you don't know how to get out of the house. I do adore this shot where it flips to the model to show her coming up from the stairs before flipping back to her in real time. It's so good. But then she just loops back downstairs. I have no idea why she didn't try to find another weapon and try to jump attack him or hide somewhere or just anything, because of course she turns around and he stabs her in the stomach. Fucking brutal, man. So they're both just bleeding out here, and she starts talking about how prayer doesn't actually work, that they've done studies and it's conclusively found to make no difference in people's medical prognosis.
But I think it's beautiful that we all pray for each other. It's just nice to think about someone other than yourself.
And honestly, I really like that. Both just as a statement and to let us know that she is nowhere near as naive as we originally believed. She actually has put a great deal of thought into so much of this. So as she's praying for the two of them, even though she knows he's terrible, he's slowly creeping up on her with the box cutter before Barnes bashes him in the head with that Chekhov's 3-nailed plank from earlier, before again tragically collapsing to her death. So from that moment on, this movie essentially becomes personal interpretation. At face value, Paxton manages to find a vent to escape from by using the model house, stumbles out into the bright snowy morning before collapsing as a butterfly lands on her hand and almost immediately disappears. A callback to earlier in the movie when she said that when she dies, she'd like to come back as a butterfly to let her loved ones know that she was okay.
I'll land right on their hand.
Now, reincarnation is definitely not a Mormon belief, but even if it was just the concept, I want to send a sign to them in this way, it's a nice sentiment. So in this, we have a handful of options. Some I'll mention, some I won't. Like, there's the option that this is Barnes actually letting her know that despite being dead, she's made it to some afterlife and is just kind of stealing her plan, so she knows what's up. There's also the possibility that this is like a blood loss hallucination and she's just imagining seeing the butterfly and it's just kind of her mind being like, hey, you're okay. Or it could be a blood loss hallucination and she's not remotely okay. And then the really big one is that nothing after the praying actually happened, that she's dying in that basement, and this is her near-death experience, just imagining that she's managed to escape. Going right back to that butterfly dream. Am I a butterfly dreaming I'm a man, or a man dreaming I'm a butterfly? Is she alive and escaped, or dying and imagining it? And people are getting really specific with it, like her phone never finds service, though I don't think a hallucination would take that into account. I think that kind of feels a little bit more like the spinning top in Inception. You're just kind of waiting to see if something happens. A lot of people point out that Barnes didn't bleed enough when he cut her arm open, implying her heart was done pumping, so she was absolutely dead, but that could also just be a filmmaking choice. Obviously, lots of little minor interpretations that can go on there, but like the two big things is either did she make it out actually, or was that all a hallucination and she's dying in the basement? Because her stumbling out into the light of day sounds a lot like what Barnes described her near-death experience as.
A blinding white light. Clouds, but not heaven.
Brains just start releasing everything they have left when you're dying, but it also feels like this moment was all too structured for that. But the point is that there's no clear answer. We can't know everything. It all just comes down to what we believe. And personally, I like that ending and how it ties into the rest of the story. I will choose to believe she made it out, though. Now, just some wrap-up thoughts. I do find it interesting that some people manage to find this as like a super anti-religious movie when I feel like it ultimately lets you take away from it what you want. That despite it all, they maintain their faith, and one of them might have even made it out in the end for it. That either way, she bested this evil man. Tragically, that would also mean that all those women are just gonna slowly starve to death, but probably still better than what he's been doing to them long term. Then there's an option that Paxton may have ultimately come to a realization that religious institutions use control to manipulate people, but that she still chooses to have that spirituality and be kind, choosing to still find value in prayer because it's good to put your thoughts in others. You can easily walk away from this movie agreeing with most of what Mr. Reed said about religion while also thinking he's a narcissistic monster, as you can walk away seeing it as a grand test of faith.
Sister Paxton, do you still believe in God?
Yes.
The whole movie is just trying to get you to question the things you think you know, including the things you've been told and maybe the things you immediately believed as they were presented to you in this movie. There's just so many areas that can be interpreted in. Like the polygamy conversation, I really took away that Mr. Reed was 100% using that in disgust about Joseph Smith's behavior and to try to point out to them the glaring issues in their own institution that could have actually greatly affected their lives. Obviously, I think he was using that specific topic to unsettle them a bit more, but not specifically like he'd be wanting to try something on them. But my best friend thought it was absolutely implying that he would have intended to do something with them and probably did things with the prophets, and that he would have ended up doing something to Paxton because it seemed pretty clear that he wanted to try to convert her to being one of them as well. I just personally found the prophets to be a little bit too seasoned and maybe rotted from moisture for that, but who knows? Maybe they are his polygamist wives. I think in some way they kind of are. Either way, I don't think this movie is trying to convince anyone of a particular ideology, but instead just have us thinking about the things that we believe and why. What drives our convictions, what closes us off from other things, and what stops us from trying to consider those other options. How do we reconcile how little we actually know? All wrapped up in this movie that is like simultaneously horrifying and diabolical and a little bit goofy and a little bit funny.
Order! Excuse me.
Never mind.
And still just coming across so terrifying. Like when you realize he had the watering can when he answered the door, meaning he'd just been in the dungeon with the women. I don't think there's a single performance falling short here. I love how they had like the different girls step up in different ways at different points in the movies. I think all three of these actors handle the heavy dialogue incredibly well and had me engaged from start to finish. You could literally talk about this movie for hours because literally everything that's said can be interpreted in different ways, or earlier conversations start tying into later conversations and those iterations just go all the way through. So overall, I just really enjoy this movie, and I'd love to know what you think in the comment section down below. Were you really excited for this one? Were you not? Did you love it when you saw it? Did it not live up to your expectations in certain ways? Did it go in a direction you weren't expecting? I do think this is one of those ones that would have been better to catch before seeing any trailers. I know I felt very good about not seeing a trailer before it. So let me know what you think. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my YouTube channel members and Patreon supporters. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.